All right. If you are watching or listening to this, you are part of the resistance, and we mean that very seriously. All right, everybody. Hey, I'm one of your hosts, Mark. Other host down there, Redbeard. Whoop, whoop.
Redbeard.
Yeah, Redbeard in the house. All right, and we've got a very special guest tonight. Matter of fact, why don't we just jump right into this? Right.
Yep.
So, thanks for watching the podcast. Go ahead, get yourself an adult beverage, strap in for a ride because it's going to be a ride tonight. We've got a special guest. His name is Paul. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to him and he can share what he wants to share about himself with everyone.
Yep.
Paul, sir, I'm going to bring you full screen.
Hey, good evening. My name is Paul, and I've been in the information technology and security field for 30 years. I'm a trainer part-time and a full-time worker during the day.
There you have it. He's a very
Nice.
knowledgeable individual. Man knows what he's talking about. All right, so tonight's subject, we're going to ask the question, like, how long can this continue? How long can it go on? How long is this sustainable? And by what I mean there is like, how long can this go on? Is how long can we keep looking at these geopolitical events, these events of such magnitude that could result in the end of the human race as we know it, or even maybe we all survive, but as we were kind of joking around, we can't remember the name of the movie, but you survive, but and just to find out that you're king of the ash heap, right? There's nothing left but a bunch of rubble, but you're there. That's a very distinct possibility. So this is kind of a somber conversation. We're going to look at it through the lens, as we've done in the past, of Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine, China vis-a-vis Taiwan, and then how that pertains to all the rest of us, kings of the ash heap out there. But so kind of a somber conversation here tonight. So strap in, pour yourself an adult cocktail. But before we do, we're going to split up housekeeping. I'm going to do one little bit of housekeeping here first, and then we're going to come over to Paul for our first question. But over on my company, Centerline Systems, starting Monday of next week, so at 1400 Monday, the 3rd of July, and then every Monday thereafter for 8 weeks, so we're going to try to do this 8 times, I'm going to hold a charity auction. So I've got materials, some new stuff I'm trying to take a look at, some old stuff I'm moving out so I can make room for new material, and we're going to start making some very unique designs of some of the gear. There's going to be themes to it all, and we're going to open that up to the bidding of viewers, right? And whoever makes the highest bid, that's the winner. And then that money, whatever that bid is going to go to a charity. And so I'm going to I already kind of posted, I shot a video today. It'll post on Centerline Systems tomorrow that talks about this a little bit. But next Monday, the 3rd of July at 1400, that's the launch of this. And I am very humbly asking anyone who's watching this podcast, I don't care if you don't subscribe to Centerline Systems, but go over, watch that video, share it with everybody, because to make this work, and again, we're going to talk about some kind of scary subjects here. The world is scary. The economy is scary. There's all kinds of scary shit going on. So I just thought, well, why not during this type of moment try to do something good? And I hope you're on board with me and you help out, and we try to do something good, and we raise money for good charities. And I'm going to explain the rules and how this is all going to work over on Centerline Systems next Monday. But please, if you're watching this podcast, follow us over there in Centerline Systems for this charity auction that we're going to do. Ask your friends, pass it out. And we got some great gear, handcrafted, made in America, cool color combos. And there's going to be, because, I'm a smart ass, there's going to be little tweaks and this and that and little, Easter eggs and all that kind of crap, but some really good charities. And hopefully we can raise some money over there. So that was my little intro. Any of you guys got anything to add to that before we go into the serious nature of tonight's conversation?
I'm just going to say that I'm going to 100% chill for you, Mark, and let people know that as somebody who has had several of your products, none of those products have ever, I put a lot of time and wear and tear into those. And Mark and his team do a fantastic job with stitch work, making a good quality product. I've had one of your belts. I have 2 of your belts, but the first belt I ever got it's still there. Minus a little bit of fraying on the Velcro. It's still Velcro is perfect. I have a Mother Canteen carrier. Back in the day when you did a couple other things, I still have one of your first, I think one of your first iterations of your plate carriers and your chest rig, which were, I'm still,
The Force system.
yeah, I still freaking love that system. I wish it had, I wish it was something that proliferated more. But the point being is like, you're not going to be disappointed with the craftsmanship and the work for it. And I wouldn't say it, and Mark knows this, I wouldn't say it if I didn't genuinely like the products. It's good stuff. It works, and it works for you, not against you. So that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I
Well,
can add to that. I have a mother canteen carrier that I keep attached to the back of my tractor chair, so that when I'm out and working in the yard and doing things like that, or I'll put it attached to a side by side. I also use a belt pack from another American-made company that makes belt packs and chest packs. Keep that with me on when I'm working in the yard or in the property somewhere, and absolutely 100% great gear, no doubt. And it saves me from carrying a backpack and all the other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Everything fits, so it's great.
Yeah.
Well, and so that's kind of the other part of it. So again, great charities. Hopefully we can raise some money. So I guess this one, now that we're just, I guess, having a little bit of fun. So I used to do, and I still do, I did one last year, these charity garage sales. I didn't do it for about 2 years, 3 years with my back. It just was not possible, but I did one. I was able to do it last year, and I raised over $1,000 for 23rd veteran. And so just a little plug, just to let everybody know. So I'm going to start off where I left off. So the last charity thing I did was before 23rd veteran. So I'm going to start, we're going to kick off this whole campaign, and we're going to, all proceeds, whoever places the highest bid and wins, gets the gear. That money is going to go over to 23rd veteran. If you don't know who they are, go check out a great veteran group having to do with veteran suicide. And we'll have other great charities too. So, to Paul's point and Jeremy's point, support small business America. Yep. I know times are tough, but if we want small business America to stay alive, we got to support it. And now that times are tough, and now more than ever, we should be looking towards good random acts of kindness and charity. So that's my final plug there. That kind of stuff too, right?
So,
all right, enough about that. That'll be a video on posted at 1400 on the 3rd of July. And over on Centerline Systems, I'll have if you don't know how to find me, then, I don't know, then how are you even watching this video? Because you have to, what's that, by happenstance?
By happenstance. The algorithm messed up and it sent you to us.
Yeah, that's right. The algorithm messed up and sent you to us. Hey, so on that note, let's just jump right into the algorithm messed up and, why you're here, right? So again, the question, or the premise for tonight's conversation is, how long can this continue, or is this sustainable? At what point does something snap and does something break? And what does that look like? Now, we're going to be using some kind of broader strokes, right? We're looking at this from an elevated perspective, but you're going to ask yourself, I mean, right now, everybody seems, well, I don't know if we're afraid or not afraid of what's going on. Are we concerned about Russia and Ukraine and Prigozhin and the supposed coup? Are we concerned about China, Taiwan, infrastructure, economy? These are the kind of big issues, and these could have some incredibly high consequence. If something bad happens, it could be really bad. So I think, and Paul knows where we're going with this, so I'm going to turn it over to Paul for opening comments, but that is the framework for tonight's conversation. Paul, do you want to jump in on that first?
So one thing from my field is the semiconductor issue is a major concern for me, and everyone else for that matter. But the fact that Taiwan has the most advanced semiconductor plants, and they have a new facility that they just put out in 2022. So would China want to invade? No, they would like to take over that stuff, in my opinion. It's my opinion. But let's say they do either or. If they destroy it or take it over, that's a major blow to all of our computer systems, phone systems, others beyond my field. But the semiconductor issue is definitely a problem. Then we also have the supply chain issues, because the South China Sea and Taiwan being there and being able to get product in and out, and China has threatened to destroy ports. To it's one of those things where I don't believe that they're going to out and out destroy something, but they could take it to a crawl or cripple it a little bit in that sense.
Well, and then beforehand, we've all kind of talked about this a little bit, and kind of just letting everybody know, we'll see how this conversation goes, and we might end up doing an announcement. Well, here I'm kind of saying we might end up having all three of us back somewhere in the near future doing this as a live stream and actually teaching a class, because Paul is very knowledgeable in this area. Jeremy is very well read and studied and knowledge in this area. I used to teach a class kind of along these same lines. So we might end up doing that in the very near future, and that'll be our first live stream. But I'm bringing that up because what we're talking about, what Paul's kind of getting at is, you've got the probability of an event taking place, right? And then you have the consequences of that event. And so as Paul's kind of saying, it's like, hey, what's the probability that China actually just destroys all of this infrastructure in Taiwan because of out of spite or whatever their political thought process is? What's the probability of it? And so whether that's a high or low probability event, but look at the consequences. And I think, to me, that's the warning that we have all ignored for the longest time. It's like, it doesn't matter if there's a 1% chance of doing it or a 99% chance of doing it. If they do it and the semiconductors are crushed, how does that cripple us, and how does that cripple our world and the things that we know and how we conduct business? Jeremy, I know you've got more to add to that.
Yeah. So, and it's actually something I'm going to put over to Paul too, because I think it's relevant to the semiconductors and stuff like that. But in Paul and both you, Mark, as well, I've seen several write-ups or notations, if you will, or I guess perhaps historical research, to where a lot of people evaluated like just our infrastructure grid alone. And the fact that, we have access to stuff that's better, more efficient, has the capability of being more protected, but yet we still seem to operate on an infrastructure that's, I think at best, like 40 years dated. Some infrastructure is probably older than that. And, if you think about the impact that something like semiconductors would have on just our infrastructure alone, the fact that we are still operating on a relatively unprotected, outdated form of infrastructure, I think has a lot of ramifications, notwithstanding the fact of the semiconductors and in other materials and in things that go along with that. So, my question to Paul first is, what, from your perception also, like, is that something you guys talk about in your field, where it's like, hey, like, there's a lot of like great new things out there, but we're still running on something that's basically almost a relic at this point?
Yeah. And I think that I've always been an advocate for upgrading our power grid, modern equipment, adding backup capabilities, and not we're relying on China at this point anyway. So if they're the ones involved in that, that's a major risk there. As far as, from in my field in information technology, when, I may have a generator, but, if the power's down and everything's been, let's say there was an EMP of some sort, everything's been fried. So I can at least, I don't want to get catastrophic here, but at least I can keep my food that I have and, the house maintained and, whatever, and do those type of things. But I do think that it is a major concern, because most of the companies that I work for, we have redundancy.
Yes.
So if there is, and I've worked for companies, whether they're large or small, where some will have, well, we have a disaster recovery site. All right, well, we're in York, Pennsylvania, and our disaster recovery site is in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's 30 minutes north, or it's in Philadelphia for that matter. They're all on the same power grid. So, I try to, explain to the, those that I work for, that, okay, we need to consider going into different areas. And I don't want to get too technical, and I'll be brief on this, but cloud computing, AWS, Amazon, and Microsoft, they all, and Google, they compete with that. They have different zones, the East Coast, West Coast, international, whatever. And it's more expensive if you have redundancy on the West Coast and East Coast. What happens if the power grid goes out on the East Coast, or Amazon has an outage on the East Coast? If you don't have that redundancy, you're down. You're out of business until they bring it back up. So sorry to get off on a tangent there, but
that's good.
Yeah, it kind of all relates to what I do, but the power is key. You need that first.
So,
well, I want to, hang on, if I can, Jeremy, I want to jump in, because Jeremy, you kind of started us down this road, and Paul took us in that direction as well. But so if you just think about that from probability and consequences of whatever the action might be. So, if you're looking at asymmetric style warfare, like, so before we started this, the podcast tonight, Jeremy and I, in our pregame, Jeremy started taking us down the rabbit hole of nuclear, mutually assured destruction, major nuclear conflict. Okay. A low probability event. We're not going to, we'll dance around it, but maybe we'll do that as a separate topic someday, but we can dance around it. But even if it's a low probability event, the consequences of that event, even if it was like a 5, 10, one missile type of exchange, there's really high consequences. And that's kind of what Paul's saying. So Paul, throwing this back over for you and for Jeremy, because we didn't plan that, is if you look at that then, and if you're China, and that you've got America, excuse my crass language here, but if you've got America economically by the balls, right, on so many ways, because America has stupidly, to your point, not looked at, having redundancy and having things, in different zones for better, probability of success or backup systems. If we're putting all of our eggs in that, but everything's cheap, it's made over in China basket, where does that then leave us from, regardless of the probability of an event, the consequences? I mean, again, you could have a correction. Let me rephrase this. You could have a low consequence event. Let's use Paul's scenario. Let's just say that they decide to destroy all the superconductor factories over in Taiwan, right? What does that then do to us? And then does that then play into your war fighting strategy? Because I really don't believe Russia or China is going to use a straight up head on conflict. I think they're going to look very much more asymmetric and unconventional. Did that statement make sense? Paul, do you want to jump on that first? And then maybe, or Jeremy, whoever wants to jump on that.
Paul can take it. Yeah. Oh, you're muted, Paul.
Yeah, you're muted, Paul. Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Okay, so
there we got you. Now we got you.
The semiconductors go, China, I believe, is the largest manufacturer. So it would just slow things down. So they're still going to make their money. So, maybe there is an incentive there, but I think they want the newer technology that Taiwan has, and as well as having the ability to produce more. So again, Mark, like you said, the likelihood is a risk. The consequence is a risk. In this case, the likelihood of them doing a destructive act in Taiwan is low, but the risk of anything happening to that is a very high risk. So we don't know, honestly, if China takes down our economy it's going to take down their economy. And I know we've talked about this, about, some of my positive attitude in a very negative world right now, that I don't believe they would do that to take down our economy completely, because if they do, it will kill their economy. However, it doesn't mean it's a risk.
Correct. So there's like this dependency, it's this. I mean, right now the economic systems, are so dependent, because I'm glad you just brought that up, Paul, kicking this over to Jeremy, because you hear a lot of people say, oh, well, this, that, and the other. Like, well, yeah, but China's economy is very much tied to our economy, right? It's a consumer base, and whether they're communist and we're capitalist, it doesn't matter. If Americans aren't buying cheap ass Chinese stuff, the Chinese economy, suffers as a result. So I think you have to factor that in when you start looking at the outcomes or what the dots on the wall, what picture they paint. what that really looks at, because, you know, an all out war with Taiwan or a straight up invasion runs the risk of, you know, let's just be honest. I mean, and you're coming over to Jeremy and the Paul as well, but like, who actually would suffer the most if America withdrew from China and just severed economic ties? Yeah, there would be some consequences for us initially, but we actually could. And I know somebody's going to say, well, there's rare earth minerals, and there's other areas that where we would be screwed, and because there's very few places that have it. But technologically, in industry and infrastructure, we could get that back up. And honestly, I think we should have done it a long time ago. I've always thought the one China policy and Nixon and all those guys, you know, like really screwed the pooch. But that's a separate conversation. Right. But Jeremy, see where I'm going? Like, I think when you start looking at it, I think therefore China, and to Paul's point, China is playing a different game, and we've got to be smart enough and realize what it is, because it isn't going to be something that destroys the economy. Now, before anyone says anything else, unless the Chinese leadership says, you know what, let's go ahead and burn it all down, because America will be defeated. They will eat themselves, you know, alive, and we can rebuild and do this better, differently, or we can, or we flex and we look over at Africa or some other, you know, India or the Indian, you know, subcontinent basin. We look at some other place to become the new industrial hub or consumer market base. Just kind of see what I'm saying? Right. I don't think, and unless they're saying, yeah, it's worth it, but you know, we still want those Americans and we still want some of their capabilities. So, you know, for me, I think that really reduces the probability of a major engagement or a nuclear engagement. I think it really, to me, keeps pointing towards asymmetric and unconventional warfare. Jeremy.
Right. Yeah. So there's a couple points that I actually want to hit on, which I think is interesting. So one thing, and we've talked about this on here too, Mark and Paul, I'm sure you're probably familiar with this, but one of the things that we have to actually evaluate and take a serious look at, because it is growing and it is developing really, really rapidly, is BRICS. And for those of you that don't understand what BRICS is, it's essentially it's like a pact, or it's a group of countries that have come together. Russia, China, and many countries in Africa. I believe Pakistan and Iran is in there. But the reason this is significant is because BRICS has been growing at a pretty astonishing rate, and what they've managed to do is to undermine the U.S. petrodollar. And this is significant because of the fact that they are waging, to some degree, a war on our economy, getting the world, many countries away from the U.S. petrodollar and getting them more into the fold of BRICS. Now, BRICS is actually in the process right now of creating a new type of monetary system for trading, whether that's resources, goods, supplies, whatever the case might be. And I feel like this is one avenue of approach that they can use to actually supplement and replace the need for the U.S. economy and the U.S. dependency, if they can get enough people in there, which I think that they're starting to do. And it gives China a little bit more leeway, because now they have, now they're starting to get a lot more consistent trading partners. And if people have been watching,
and they're getting,
go ahead,
and they're getting people to trade in the yuan,
right?
In the Chinese currency as opposed to the dollar. Yep.
And this is fundamentally huge. In one area that the U.S. has been actually been getting rapidly kicked out of is Africa. Right now, Africa is becoming the trading hub and the money pit of the world, in which both Russia and China are really making a strong pivot. And a lot of African nations want nothing to do with NATO countries, and the U.S. especially. So that shift, I think, is going to have big impacts, more, I think, for us than what some people might realize. And it's going to be extremely beneficial for countries like Russia and China, to where they're less dependent on us and on other countries in NATO and even outside of NATO. And they can create kind of that system of stability. Now, that being said, if we want to look at it from a different perspective, I'm going to put this out there, and Mark, you could probably bounce off of this here too. But what we're also seeing, especially with the war in Ukraine, is there has become like this vacuum, or this siphon for military equipment, money, resources, into essentially like this black hole, where even Jens Stoltenberg, who is the leader of NATO, has basically said, look, like, our stockpiles are depleted. We see this both in the US, where there's been a rapid depletion of our stuff. And I know that people are going to say, well, it's so that we can replace it. Well, that's all good and fine, but you have to understand that it takes an incredible industrial capacity to replace in a sufficient amount of time to make that worth it. And I don't think that we're there yet. We could very well get there, but there's a lot of roadblocks to getting there. Whereas you look at somebody like Russia, and they've already pivoted to a wartime economy and a wartime industrial complex. So if China and Russia and in other countries really, really want to put the blow or the damaging blow to us, and in other countries like us, it's creating a vacuum in which we funnel resources in there. They just get either taken or destroyed at literally very little expense to them to some degree. And then they start to undermine the US petrodollar. That in and of itself can create a very, very powerful position of pivoting to becoming more stable and less reliant on the West, respectively. So I'm going to put this over to both Mark and Paul to hear what their opinions are on that.
Paul, you're muted still. Do you want to jump in? You got your
Sorry, I only do that because I don't want my dogs to make noise doing it. So one of the issues I have is, maybe there's a compromise, and I don't want to specify anyone in particular because there have been similar situations with other leaders of our country that may have had nothing specifically to do with, but we're looking at China and Ukraine. And I'm just thinking, how compromised are we that we are doing this? And then I look back through, back in the early 90s and the Gulf War, I was younger and that was, wow, we're doing, we're helping out Kuwait and we're taking down, we're trying to take down a dictator at the time. Never did, but did a lot of good work there. But what about things like the Nord Stream pipeline? Why is there no reaction to that? Why, if I don't even know who did it. And again, I'm talking from a civilian standpoint. I have no experience. This is just some average person that used to watch TV, but I watch at least keep up on the news. I'm just curious as to why is this even possible, and how it. I mean, obviously the media has a lot to play in this. I thought the media was bad in the 90s, and I can't believe that they were they were maybe potentially neutral, but yeah, I'm not really sure here, and I think that as far as going to different countries or different continents and blocking us out. Absolutely. Maybe that's why they're not doing anything about the Nord Stream. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I don't think they're doing anything about Nord Stream because, and just in my humble opinion, because it wasn't any of the quote unquote bad guys who did it. I mean, I'm here. We'll just see what happens. But, you want to start thinking about that operation and, the resources, the skill set, the training, the capabilities, the functionality. There's so many. That's an incredibly, potentially complicated, operation. You think about it like, well, you're just planting some explosives. Yeah. On a really small, I mean, it's not, the ocean's huge. And even if that pipe is 10 feet wide, it's still really small. Now they know where it is. There's obviously, very, detailed, survey work, because, for underwater issues and because of, it's promote, it's carrying or transmitting, like, a natural resource. So, they know where that stuff is, but still, you ask yourself, did Russia really do this? Start breaking that down into like, the cost benefit analysis of what really just break that down from a CBA, from Russia's perspective. You look at all the posturing and the word salads that we were throwing up beforehand. I think it is an indicator of another escalation of, not just rhetoric. I mean, like again, for Paul, for me, it's like I think it's pretty obvious who did that. We just won't talk about it, and because to your point, because we don't have a press anymore. That's another. For me, that's another indicator of how horrible and how shitty things have become, because we used to be that beacon on the hill for freedom and free speech and open-mindedness. And now we are, I mean, again, how many people on even the left, the quote unquote left, an average normal Democrat looks around and says, gosh, our media and our press is just horrible. I mean, this is Pravda. I mean, how many times have you heard, how many people make references to American media is no different from the media of the former Soviet Union? I mean, that's really what we've become. So, so I want to just kind of throw that back around into another question for both you guys. See, for me, this all comes into unconventional warfare, asymmetric warfare. And I think everything Paul just said to me still keeps pointing that way. And that comes all the way back down to with Jeremy when we brought up BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. You guys do your own research, people watching, but, I'm pretty damn sure BRICS has I think it has surpassed the GDP of the G7 countries, right? So to Jeremy's point, devaluing the petrodollar, to me, it's all part and parcel of a larger plan or a larger way to defeat. How are you going to defeat America going head to head? Well, going back to what Jeremy and I were saying, are you going to use nuclear weapons? Well, okay, let's just put that aside for right now. Are you going to do it conventionally? Well, I think we've kind of shown some of our dominance. Now our enemies see that as well, but now recently we're also showing our ass, and we have a spy balloon that flies over the country and no one does a damn thing about it, right? And see, I'm bringing this up because to Paul's point and Jeremy's point, I think it highlights, again, is China going to openly do X or Y? Is Russia going to openly do X or Y? Why would you do that when you can see how easy it is to manipulate our own media? How you can use unconventional or asymmetric, methods, BRICS, Belt and Road, Jeremy's point, getting these guys, suckering them into some, deplete all their strategic reserves and, and not doing anything about Nord Stream, or actually doing, who did that really hurt? Did that really hurt Russia or did that hurt, us? I mean, like, it's like we're just doing dumb things, and we're not even doing that stuff in our own homeland, right? We're stopping oil production. We're stopping, gas. We're going in the exact opposite direction that you would think a country who wants to really be able to be self-sufficient and take care of itself. So I think, to that point, and as our, Paul, our esteemed guest, and Jeremy, our esteemed scholar, and, his beard's getting a little better, but, he still does a great job on smartness. I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, if you take a step back, I mean, I don't see any adversary that's getting ready to launch, a concerted, again, Cold War style nuclear event. I think the attacks are already taking place, and they're taking place in more unconventional and asymmetric manners. And again, and that BRICS is one of them. I mean, just
100%.
All right. I just rambled for too long. All right. I'm sure Paul, Jeremy, both you guys have something to add there. Who wants to go?
Do you want to take it first, Paul?
Yeah, no, and I think that the unconventional warfare can lead back to my profession, where we have countries like China and Russia that are the primary adversaries when it comes to information security, ransomware, malware attacks. And, in my position, I'm looking, again, to do a risk assessment. What can I do to protect against ransomware or a malware attack from anyone? I mean, but obviously the majority of them are coming from Russia and China and international sites. Well, actually, I take that back. The majority of the number of the attacks are inside the United States, but the biggest risk are those outside. And there may be VPNs involved in there, and who knows where they're located, right? But so what do I say? All right, well, we need to have tools to protect us. And there are a lot of great tools out there, and we need them. But education is the number one thing. We have to educate our employees, our customers, everyone, to ensure that they are being careful. Now, when
hang on, before you go any further, Paul, before you go any further, let me just add to that though. But do you think that's even so? Again, if I'm your enemy and I can figure out a way to actually turn your own media and your own educational systems against you, how can you even educate yourself when, again, we have people who still to this day, if you talk about, the coof, the recent unpleasantness, they won't even allow your video to be up. I mean, so it seems like we are stuck in a rut, or our systems have been manipulated or perverted to such an extent that people can't even get educated. You speaking out can actually get you silenced.
Yeah. Now, and honestly, there's before we could check for, we can say if you see a spelling mistake or you see something that looks weird, don't do that. Now they can use AI. AI adds a whole new area to this, where you can now have somebody that doesn't speak English from another country craft a perfect email to phish you, and you'll buy it. And everyone is susceptible. Me, you, Redbeard, everyone. We're all susceptible. It's possible. So we need to be really careful. So education is becoming harder because of AI. But I do agree with you that it's so overwhelming. You need that tool too. You need the tool and the education. Without both, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
Well, and Redbeard, bringing it over to you, I mean, I think the education's huge. And again, I'm just going to reiterate before you start speaking. I think that the tool of education is also being stripped away from us. And I think that's being done by design. Better to have everybody fat, dumb, and lazy than, well-educated and physically fit. Jeremy?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to kind of attempt a funny here, but Paul, basically what I'm gathering from you is be very cautious and trepidatious of the mail order bride email that you get from Eastern Europe. Is that what I'm getting? Because I mean,
yeah, in a roundabout way. Yeah.
if it seems too good to be true, it probably is, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So I had to do something to kind of break the heaviness of it, but no,
let's get back into the heaviness, because you're making me feel bad, because so hang on, so I'm not going to have a Ukrainian bride arrive next week? Is that what you're telling me? That's really breaking my heart, dude.
Look, ride the lightning, Mark. You go be that savior.
All right, keep going, Jeremy.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to kind of go back to some of the points that you made also, Mark, because there is a conversation to be had to some degree as it pertains to the using up of supplies. And one thing that you're talking about, certain strengths and weaknesses that perhaps both sides may exhibit. And I will say that I think one of the biggest blows, specifically to the United States and NATO, that we've seen actually arrive from the Ukrainian conflict is it's not even so much. Well, it is part and parcel to the equipment that's over there, but at the same time, the United States and NATO has very, very much prided itself during this entire conflict of like, we have superior weapons, we have superior training, we have Ukrainians that are over here and they're training in NATO bases, albeit the one of the largest problems that people talk about is, well, that's great, you're training Ukrainians in NATO bases, but when they're spread over 40 different bases, there's no sense of cohesiveness, which I would agree with, because, having them in different bases in different countries, there's going to be different methodologies. That being said, when it came time to put this NATO supremacy, and I'll say it that way because I firmly believe that's kind of the attitude that they have, to put this NATO supremacy mentality and this equipment on the line, on the battlefield, you ultimately saw, you kind of saw it trip and blunder. And that's a hit to the image of NATO, because you had these people that just 2 weeks ago were overwhelmingly confident in the fact that like NATO training is superior, the equipment's superior, this will give the Ukrainians the ability to basically just blast through the line. That's what a lot of these people are saying. And then the offensive happened, and now you have people within NATO and other facets of this area, and they're like, actually, Russia might not actually suck the way that we said they might. And it's like, okay, so that's almost a semi-dangerous concession for that image of the United States and NATO outside of like the BRICS, because it's like, okay, that basically is a shock to this idea that they've been touting for decades. And militarily, that just kind of makes it apparent to people like China and Russia and any other potential opposition, like, okay, well, they literally were talking and beefing this up this whole time. And when it came time, it kind of fell flat. And so yeah, Mark, it looks like you have something to say to that.
Well, I like the direction you're going, because it's multifaceted, if you ask me.
100%.
And I'm curious to your pulse, because it's not just from that military prowess,
Right.
it's not from that industrialization. It's also from, I mean, look at how we're being laughed at, on the global stage right now, from, everything in terms of like, you guys don't believe in freedom. You're this beacon on the hill, yet you're doing this or you're doing that, or like, or you think it's okay to mutilate children, or like, again, it's a very long list. We really are. And again, so this to me, if I was that, evil doctor, like $1 billion, character, I wouldn't just be focusing on one thing. I'd be focusing on multiple aspects, multiple facets. And to me, that's why when you were saying that, I immediately thought of like, well, here's 6 other arenas in which we're showing our asses, or we're either we're being stupid, or we're being perceived as stupid, type of thing.
Yeah. And I guess that's one of the points that I'm trying to make, is like, look, like, I think NATO especially, and I say NATO because I hate saying the NATO in the US because we're part of that, obviously. But the point is like, you had this situation to where they were just so full of themselves for so long, and now there's this thing to where it kind of left people to a certain degree wanting, because there's no form of recourse to where it's just like, oh, well, this is why it didn't work out. It's like, no, you literally, you said that you were capable of training people to this standard, or doing something to the standard, even if it's outside of military endeavors. And it's like, and you failed. It's just, so how are you going to fix this? And
it's not even just that you failed. It's like, there's times in which we've quote unquote failed, but I think it's evident to everybody in the world that we only failed because we actually didn't try, or we didn't do it. We didn't live up to our standards. And what I mean by this,
what I'm saying. Yeah.
And then so bringing this over to Paul, again, to me, this is still, it would fall into my thought process if I was the bad guy, and if I was focused on UW, unconventional warfare, asymmetric, operations, where we claim to be this, again, Jeremy, to your point, we claim to be sophisticated. We claim to have all this technological, prowess, and we still don't know who that January 6th bomber was, or we don't know who leaked the Supreme Court Roe v. Wade decision. And then this goes to Paul, because I think Paul will be one of the first people. Like, look, I know let me rephrase it. My knowledge of what we were capable of doing ended when I left the agency, 11 years ago. But so even based on that 11-year-old knowledge that I have, where I can extrapolate where we are now. But now this kind of goes into Paul's wheelhouse. I mean, I think Paul can sit and talk about that as far as for like capabilities, and we just said it. We don't know who managed to attack Nord Stream to this day. Seriously, I'm supposed to believe that we haven't been able to. Right?
So, what my initial thoughts with Nord Stream, because I use the certain 72-hour rule. I want to take everything in. My initial thoughts were, maybe this was a catastrophic failure. You have gas going through there with rebar and concrete. It could have started a bomb. It could have blown it up there. But then I saw that there were 2 sections. So, I don't think that is the cause there. I when it comes to, and going back to what Redbeard said about NATO real quick, and correct me if I'm wrong, because again, Mark, like you said, your knowledge may be dated, but it's more than I have. So I come from the corporate world in a sense, and I hate to say that, but so NATO convinced Ukraine to surrender their nukes, and then Russia wouldn't let them join. What kind of thing was that? If they're not part of NATO, why would they give up the nukes that they had? The majority of the nukes from the Soviet Union were in there. I don't understand that at all. I just don't get it.
Well, I mean, see, but now we would be getting into like a historical lesson, which I don't think, very many Americans or Westerners have actually taken the time and done the research, and that's, again, going all the way back full circle into education. We 100%. Are so, it's got to be immediate. And I don't, if I have to read a book and take 6 hours out of my life, even if that's spread out over a 30-day period, I'm just not willing to do it anymore because, hey, Amazon can be here in 2 days and it's free ship, we've just become that. And so I think, and again, if I was trying to defeat you, I would try to help promote. If I saw that this is what your culture was becoming, I would compel that. I would promote that amongst your nation as best I could, because you're not even going to be able to answer these simple questions that we're talking about right here. Like, look, that was all part of the concessions that we made with Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the wall came down. So why didn't Ukraine keep them? Because it wasn't part of the deal. And we made assurances to Russia, and that's why Ukraine didn't become part of NATO. We made all these assurances to Russia. I mean, I know Jeremy has takes it upon himself to know a lot about a lot of different things, right? And so, Jeremy, without the risk of you going into a 30-minute explanation, but like if you can just give the 3 bullets. I mean, like, again, there's a couple key dates, 99, 2014, 2099, 2011, 2014. There's some key dates there that, behind this conflict that most people just haven't even gone out and just even done a cursory search of. And then therefore that puts us in the position we're making comments or we're making arguments and we don't even know, and I'm not saying you're doing this, Paul, but that's it. Everybody's like, why isn't Ukraine part of NATO? But my counter argument would be like, why in the hell would we ever want Ukraine to be part of NATO? That would be my argument based on my understanding of history and the Russian people and the Soviet Union, the Cold War, NATO, its charter. I mean, here's where I'm going to go with this. I'm just going to say this, and I'm not punting, but Lindsey Graham, and other war hawks, now they're trying to give NATO concessions to Ukraine. In other words, so part of our charter, if a NATO nation is attacked, that's part of the whole charter, nations come to defense. But now they're trying to even give some of these protections and provisions over to Ukraine, even though it's not a NATO signatory. In other words, and they're talking about if a nuclear plant is destroyed or attacked. And then they keep referencing one that's under Russian control. So you're already seeing this rope-a-dope and this warmongering and all this total bullshit being set up. Jeremy, you want to add? I know you got a lot of flavor to add to that, right? Because I want to bring it back over to the unconventional warfare side, because I think there's another area that both you and Paul have a lot to say about.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to do a brief overview, kind of as you talked about, Mark, and so at the when the Soviet Union fell and there were conversations to be had, there were certain agreements that were made, and I encourage people to look into this. One of the main agreements that was had between the former Soviet Union and NATO at the time, and I believe this was in, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 89 or 90, Mark. But when they sat down, they were like, hey, look, NATO will not extend beyond our line here in Germany. We will push no farther eastward. That was the agreement. And Russia took NATO at their agreement. They started coming away. You started to see certain levels of balkanization happening through Eastern Europe. You started to see countries kind of split into their own republics or their own governments and their own people, and really becoming their own thing. Well, invariably what ended up happening is NATO, as and I hate to say it this way, but as they do, and as they have done for a long time, are like, well, even though we're supposed to be a defensive organization, we're going to go a little bit farther. And so they started this creep over a certain amount of time. And that's one of the trepidations, and historically, it is one of the things that does stand up to what Russia has said is like, hey, look, we had this agreement. We agreed upon this, that you were not going to expand any farther east. And so they continued to do
And so
this.
that mission creep and that
Yes.
warmongering, really took over. Yeah. I'm not challenging your date. I think that was 91, but it was it's that time frame, 89 to 91.
And that's kind of why I brought it up to you, because I couldn't remember exactly. I knew it was somewhere around there, but forgive me for my my dating issues. But so
how dare you?
I know, how dare I? God forbid I'm not the most accurate person in the world.
At least you know about this shit,
Right.
Come on.
And so we had this. What I would say is almost this this heightening and that mission creep, as you said. So they started expanding eastward, which became very problematic. And in numerous times, Moscow was like, "Hey, like you're doing exactly what you said you weren't going to do." Okay, so fast forward, and you look like into the early 2000s, and how much territory that NATO has eventually started to take over and set up bases in, right? And I say take over because we talked about this before, Mark. If you're in NATO, you do not have sovereignty as a country. You are beholden to supporting the apparatus that is NATO. And I know some people might disagree with me on this, but let's evaluate sovereignty. Sovereignty is being able to freely operate as a country to do what you need to do to exist as a country. You sacrifice that when you let an organization like NATO in. So now you have all these countries that are convinced by NATO, like, hey, if you come in here, like, we'll protect you because we know that Russia is going to, Russia bad, NATO good. They're going to try and sway you to be agreeable with them. So they started creeping in, they set up bases. Then, and this is where the level of escalation really started to ramp up into the 2000s. We're just going to put one missile base here. We're just going to, just a couple over here. We're just going to do this. Now you speed up to 2014. This whole thing is escalated. Now you start having what I believe is called the Maidan coup, or in other terms, the color revolution that happens in Ukraine. There were elections, and you started to see this shift where U.S. involvement is considered to be what was a huge propagating factor in this coup, in this color revolution. And as a result, Russia's like, hey, whoa, like you have already gone beyond your bounds. This ain't it. Like you guys have to stop this. You have to, like, there was an election, the people voted. You guys are starting to ferment different things. You continue to move forward. You start having issues in the Donbass. You start having issues in eastern Ukraine, where many of these people were of Russian backgrounds and Russian culture, and they're Russian people, and they're like, hey, no, like all we want to do is we want to exist peacefully in the Donbass. We want to exist as a people. And Ukraine, as a result, started putting the hammer down on Russian descendant people, and so you started to get this ramping up of this conflict. Now, for those of you that don't understand a lot of the Slavic situations, Slavic conflicts are something that have gone on for a very long time, like hundreds of years, very much like the Middle East is. But the thing that makes this interesting is now you're starting to see Western powers attempt to dictate the outcomes of these conflicts for the very same thing that they blamed Russia doing, which is interfering to potentially control. And now we speed it up a little bit farther, and we get into when Russia finally goes in. Well, what people don't realize, and there was something that was brought up, I believe it was a week ago, and Mark, I think I talked to you about this, correct me if I'm wrong, but now it's found out that so when Russia made it to Kiev, when they basically had their circle around Kiev, what people don't realize is there was at one point a peace agreement that was agreed upon, it was signed, and it was said, okay, well, shortly after that happened, everybody's favorite Brit, Boris Johnson, ends up talking to Kiev, and as well as many other Western individuals from the U.S. and other NATO countries, and they're like, nope, like you 100% need to disregard that, forget that you signed this document, and you need to continue forth into the fight. And so the Russians pulled away from Kiev with the agreement and understanding, like, look, like these are the parameters we want. This is what we're agreeing on, and we're going to move forward with this agreement. Well, as we saw, that wasn't the case, and so years of escalation, the pushing east of NATO. Now you have the coup that came up, and the continuing 8 years of aggression towards eastern Ukraine by Kiev and the military forces. Now you have this perfect storm to where I would beg to say that the U.S. and NATO are really making all the calls in Ukraine, and it has nothing to do with the Ukrainian government at all, other than a few couple of instances. So we've seen this slow mission creep, as Mark has talked about, and this progression that I think really does factor into geopolitics in terms of how both Russia sees NATO and the US, and to many other people. I mean, these are historically very significant because it does attempt to change the balance in the world. But we've also seen that there's a history of the West making these agreements or saying that they're going to make certain agreements. And mind you, there's an agreement that was made. Who was the German, the gal from Germany? Mark, do you remember?
You're talking the former chancellor?
Yeah, Angela Merkel. She had made an agreement with her, and those in NATO had previously made an agreement with Russia, to which she had said after the fact, she's like, oh no, we were buying time for Ukraine.
Yeah.
You basically press and it's like, so at this point, how, like,
there was definitely, not to cut you off, but to kind of wrap this up.
Yeah.
You know what you really say, there's a history of duplicity. And so
100%.
again, going back from my perspective, we really don't have the high ground if we're out there doing this bullshit. And I think, going all the way back to what you guys, when you guys brought up BRICS, I think a lot, well, shit. And there was some just like, tin pot so-and-so from Africa just a couple of weeks ago who was laughing about, our economic system and who we are, right? Yeah. Like, you're really skewing the pooch when like some, third world, like, or, some third world, who in the hell is this guy, is poking fun at us on the world stage. Well, we really must have fallen to some extent. Now, but to your point, so you're kind of giving that history and you're bringing that full circle. There's this duplicity. Yep. It's how we're being perceived, but I guess bringing it back over is, so what are the outcomes? What's the probability of something, and what's the consequence of that thing, and what is it that we can do to help prevent it? Paul, before I kind of go into where I would like to see us talk for the last part, I want you to have a chance to respond to everything that Jeremy just said, because it kind of came about from your question, like, why did they give up their nukes? Well, I mean, I guess Jeremy's ultimate point is, well, we tricked him into doing it.
Yeah. So I do have an unconventional warfare thought, but the first thought is, when have we responded as a NATO member to another NATO nation to defend them? Was it 9/11? That was when we had help. How many major wars have we had that were a NATO nation did we support? I don't know. That's my thought. I can't think of any. And maybe I just don't know enough. Korea.
Well, so actually, no, I'm wrong. I need your Korea, but that's not true. That was actually UN and the same in Vietnam. But to that point, and Jeremy and I have talked about this before. Hey, let me change the view here. But now you have NATO creating offices in Africa. Like, what the hell does that have to do with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization?
Japan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Japan. But there it is. I mean, it's mission creep. Jeremy's whole point. There's clearly something going on being executed by people who either don't believe they are there to represent their constituents
Mhm.
or who think that's all a bunch of bullshit. Because why in the hell, to your point, NATO, see, to me, and this is my last comment on, because I'm a child of the Cold War and I was a soldier during that period of time. And I've said it a bunch of times, full the gap. That's where I'm like, yeah, this is where my bones will be interned for the rest of history. This is where I'm going to die. And, so maybe back, in the 80s, terrorism was different back then. The Cold War was different, Afghanistan, all these other things going on. It was a very different era. And it was very real and serious. And I think maybe then NATO had a point, if this is where you're going, Paul. But now, yeah, what has it ever really done? I mean, it kept the Soviet Union at bay, and Reagan probably was the one who put the final nail in that coffin and won the war, the Cold War. But what else has it really done? And why does it exist? Why is Finland going to be part of NATO? Going back to Jeremy's point, not to sidetrack us. If I was Russia, look at how some people are responding to the rumors that China wants to put some type of military base in Cuba or have some type of better, better arrangement or conditions with Cuba, which may include military or intelligence operations.
The Russians are getting cozy with Cuba again too.
Yeah, but look at how we respond to that. The Cuban Missile Crisis, for example. Yeah. But we're gonna park NATO right on their doorstep in Finland, or in Poland, or in Latvia, Estonia. I mean, again, I think to Jeremy's point, bringing it over to you, Paul, is we're pretty much like we want our cake. We want to have our cake and eat it too, and we're never the bad guys here. I think the rest of the world, unfortunately, is waking up, and I think if I was the enemy, I would use these examples from an asymmetric warfare perspective, which is propaganda, education, the internet, all these things, to really point out the hypocrisy, because it's going to do what it's doing, which is weakening your position. So,
yeah. So again, back to the unconventional warfare part of Ukraine. And I do believe that we are, as a nation, we are compromised. And there's financial impacts, and it's all coming out in the news now, and the media is complicit in blocking it. And, I was a conspiracy theorist, but now, that means that you're correct. We knew this. It was on tape. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. The guy was making deals on tape. And then he admits it recently, that says he made deals. And this is crazy. So they're targeting him, and the media is complicit, and the Democratic Party won't do anything about it. They'll defend, to the point. Okay, so now I'm going to be a conspiracy theorist for a little bit. I'm wondering if any of that money went to somebody else instead of just that family. And I'm thinking, you don't make that much money off of books, but just my thought.
Yeah. Well, and if I may add something to that quick, Paul, there was just some stuff uncovered that the FBI was working with the Ukrainian government to censor viewpoints that were not supportive of the Ukraine government and the war effort on multiple media platforms. So now we also, if there was ever a conspiracy, forget Russiagate. Let's talk about Ukrainegate and the fact that they're trying to basically get it to where Americans can't even have an opposing point of view on this.
I don't even know how we can even say this is conspiracy. I mean, to Paul's point, it's all right out in the open. I mean, again, just go back to Corona. Like, the moment we knew the size of the particulate, again, I'm not a doctor, but I can read studies. I can, and medicine didn't just start in 2019, 2020, right? There were studies. We knew the efficacy of masks the moment we knew the size of the corona particulate, we knew. So to Paul's point, and if we want to use, I'm using Corona here quickly, but Ukraine, there's no conspiracy here. It's all right out in the open, and it's there for anyone with half a freaking brain between their shoulder blades to pick up. And it's just that we're not willing to do it for some reason. And to Paul's point, the media is so complicit. So I think that goes to your point. So again, I don't think it's conspiracy. There it is. Follow the money, right? To use Bongino's term, follow the money. There it is. I mean, people are getting so wealthy and so rich off of, this grift that is Ukraine. I think, and Jeremy and I have talked about this. I don't want to speak for Jeremy, but I really think the only reason we're still even having this debate, or there's still a conflict, and the lives of people like the three of us and our counterparts in Russia and our counterparts in Ukraine, our lives are being expended because we're the expendables, right? But and it's all being done to protect people much higher up, whether it's Merkel, whether it's the Bidens, whether it's that other person that you're referencing, Paul, these unknowns, these shady whatevers. But people were making millions, if not billions of dollars off of stuff that was going on there. And it's clear, like, what we're even doing right now. Again, an accounting error. Oh, we made an accounting error, and now there's another $6 billion. Like, give me a fucking break. So, what the hell, man?
If I may, very quickly, and I'll kind of like wrap up my sentiments on this, because I believe there's a couple other areas we can hit before we're done. But there was a video that was released on Twitter. I do not know if it's still up, but it's in a weird dynamic to where I don't want people to see it, but at the same time, I believe if people did see it, they would think before they got on their war horse and wanted to drive our nation to war. And it's essentially it's like a 7.5-minute video of drone footage of Ukrainians that literally drove into pardon my French, but they drove into a minefield that the Russians had laid out in front of their defensive lines. And the video is showing Ukrainians that are stuck in the minefield, multiple Bradleys and other NATO supplied armored carriers have been destroyed or damaged to a very severe extent. There's one operational vehicle, and you're seeing Ukrainians that have dismounted their vehicles, but did not obviously realize that it was just, it wasn't just anti-vehicle mines, it was anti-personnel mines. And in the span of about 7.5 minutes, you see several Ukrainian military personnel, boom, boom, boom. You watch them hit and detonate an anti-personnel mine. You're watching guys like get their freaking legs blown off. And it's if there's ever a stronger statement for why we need to avoid war, why we should not support a warring faction just indiscriminately, why we need to be very considerate of all of our options and be diplomatic, that's it. Because I'm here to tell you that video, and I've seen several, and Mark, I'm sure you've, both obviously with your experience, but you've also watched several different videos, I'm sure, of different conflicts. And it never have I, at least, and I'm sure with you, have I felt like, no, yeah, we absolutely need to go into this. It's like when you at the very end, there's a guy who jumps off of the back of the APC, hits a mine, and starts to apply a tourniquet. And as he's crawling back, all you see is just a ton of blood behind him. Guy's leg is basically hanging on by a tendon. And again, it's very hard to watch, but at the same time, I also do feel like to some degree, if we showed people this, they would be less likely to run into a war, especially the type of warfare that's happening right now, because I think it's dawning on people to some degree, like, this is not fighting a guerrilla force. This is not fighting insurgencies. This is no bullshit, conventional war. It's gritty, it's bloody. But how do we show people, like, dude, like, why do you want to rush to war? It's not good. And it's like, you sit there and you watch stuff like that, and it's like, how do people like Lindsey Graham find this desirable to send people to their death, and like, oh, it's okay if we kill Russians, dude? Like, they're still people, right? Like, you can call somebody your enemy, but at the same time, like, I firmly believe that you got to be pretty depraved to be, and I guarantee you Graham probably has seen some of this footage, being a senator. How do you sit down and be like, no, this is perfectly okay, we're just going to expend these lives and to further our interests? Like, you got to be fucked in the head.
Well, again, you're kind of taking us in an area where there's a lot of philosophical commentary here. I'm just going to simply say because those people are evil.
Yeah,
I don't know
100%.
how else to say it. I mean, and also they're not going to be the person who's stuck in a minefield, you know, in on a foreign shore, you know, or looking at, you know, hey, I'm about to go at the wire, and this could be the last time I ever, you know, draw breath on this planet. Those aren't those people you're talking about will never be in those circumstances. So therefore, you know, what the fuck do they care? You know, because
and I kind of do feel like we should show some of this on the freaking evening news, because then people might realize, like, but
that goes into the larger point. You're never going to see that stuff because that's the propaganda machine. And if I was your enemy, you know, I don't want you to see that kind of stuff. I want you to still have the useful idiots who are still flying Ukrainian flags and talking all this kind of shit. You know, like that's because you're expending. I mean, look at just how much money we've spent economically, just the money alone, not even the material, and then the material cost to us from our, you know, our lines of defense. And if we look at, you know, permanently overseas, you know, Palm Kiss, our war supplies, you know, both at home and abroad. Forget about all the material side of it. Just look from the financial side. Look how much money we've expended.
Yeah, 100%.
And you know, and we're expending this money coming out of a, whether again now, Paul, whether this is conspiratorial or not, I don't think it is. But we just went through little over 2 years. We're still in it, you know, of where we created a crisis where a crisis didn't exist in order to destroy small business and to inflate the pocketbooks of certain people. So Jeremy, to your point, but then turning over to Paul, that's where we are. Some people are getting rich and benefiting off all this stuff, and the rest of us are sucking hind tit and barely able to put. No one even complains that gas is still over, you know, depending where you live. It's Minnesota. It's between $3.50 and $3.60 a gallon.
BlackRock.
It's almost like we've been beat down and we just accept it.
BlackRock.
This is mind-boggling.
There's a BlackRock executive that literally admitted that the war in Ukraine was good on video. Yeah. So if that doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah. All right, Paul, let's bring it over to you. Just to kind of general comments about what we were just kind of going over. And then I kind of want to take us out and point you guys in the direction, because I really think there's a UW asymmetric aspect to this that I want to kind of bring up. And Paul, that really plays to you, but I want to give you a chance to respond to all the comments that Jeremy just gave us a big pile of a big plate of shit that we all now have to eat, you know?
So working backwards, I would say that we're hearing a lot in the media these days about drug stores suffering because they're not able to make the money that they made during the last 3 years or whatever. 3 years. And they're suffering and they're going to need to, cut back on employees. That should have been a bonus for them. Okay. You had a business and now you're in a business of applying something to a human that is being forced upon them by their companies or their government or whatever it is. And it's ridiculous that they're now complaining, oh, well, we don't have our budget, whatever they're talking about. That just really upsets me because, they okay. So I will move on to the other things. I try and take notes here.
See how this is just like, sometimes this is really hard to have these conversations because there's just so freaking much.
There's so much. So, and I wanted to make a point, but Redbeard beat me to it in that I seem to be pouncing on Democrats, whatever. But no. Lindsey Graham, Republicans, they're absolutely in the same boat. So I'm independent for a reason. And however, there may not be too many Democrats that agree with me these days. But, when I was growing up and when I was, in the 90s, I had friends that were Democrats and they were pro-gun, but we argued over social issues. That was the difference. Today, it's ridiculous. You can't even be in the same room with people. I don't know. But yeah, so I do believe that there is a lot of financial incentive and it's obvious to somebody outside of the area where there's financial incentive. And I used to defend early after 9/11, I was on board. Oh, no, you're picking on this company and that company. No, they're just trying to help us. I've totally changed. I defended big pharma early in my life, and thought that, well, they're developing good drugs for us to help. But I always wondered, why don't they advance antibiotics? We have all of these super bugs. All right, but people took too many antibiotics. Why don't you put the research into super antibiotics instead of all this other stuff that's just hurting people? It's not helping anything. So now I've changed on them as well. They're all pushing me away. I'm not somebody that I take in information, I evaluate it, and then I continue to take in information. The science is never settled. That's one thing I want to make clear. So we want to make sure that we're doing the right things. So I've turned on all of them. I hope that there are some good drugs out there. They're doing some things, but this whole last 3 years has been just an absolute nightmare. And I don't know. I like you said, Mark, there's just so much to take in.
Well, here,
I don't even know where
just on your last point. So again, whether I did this intentionally or unintentionally, if I was your enemy, right? And I see, to your point, if I see how much distrust there now is because of the lies, the propaganda, the bullshit that everybody was being fed, both physical and mental and financial, punishments that were, given out to people for, wrong speak. And then now the truth is coming out, and that animosity, that sense of, maybe there's fear, maybe there's loneliness, maybe there's resentment, maybe there's, why am I even doing any of this stuff? That, what do you want to call that? I don't want to just say calling, giving up, but all of these feelings are there, and they're more prevalent in some societies than they are in others. Right. So, if I'm your enemy and if I'm good, I've got a sense of what your people are talking about and how your people are feeling and thinking. And I'm going to, whether I created that or I didn't, I'm going to capitalize on that if I think that's taking place. So Paul, I don't think that, I think that's a very worthy and a conversation that needs to be had. Look at our youth today. I mean, who are we anymore? And is that by design, or is that by, again, is it omission? Is it structure? What caused that? It almost doesn't matter. The simple fact is these things exist now. And if I was your enemy, I would be capitalizing on this and using it to my advantage to figure out other ways, whether it's from propaganda, whether it's from, continued, physical pressures or external pressures, or, or fear. That's what I would do. And I guarantee, and to your point, and there's evil people within our political system, because it is a uniparty for the most part, who are seeing that as opportunities for personal, wealth and personal gain and power, like, oh yeah, we didn't do hell, even after all of this unpleasantness, there's people from both, within the Western world who are saying we didn't do enough to crack down on dissenters. We didn't do enough to crack down on people who didn't take the vaccine. That should really scare the living bejesus out of people. And if I was your enemy and I saw the three of us and we were all like, senior officials, and we're saying that kind of stuff, I right now would be figuring out how to target you, because you are recruitable, because you clearly, there's something wrong with you. You don't represent the people. You're in it for yourself. So your ego, your selfishness, or the money that you were making off of punishing people, or cracking down on people, those type of things are vulnerabilities. And if you're already evil like that, how hard would it be for me to get you into my hip pocket and on my payroll?
Yeah.
Paul, I mean, and again, you just talked about phishing scams and all these, there's so many ways you could make these approaches.
Yeah.
And they absolutely took advantage of the shot and all that stuff. The phishing people fell for so many scams during that time, because they use that fear. And that's what really alarmed me. I've been vaccinated in my lifetime, and it was based on things like smallpox and polio. I'm old. So, I mean, those were, serious things. Now, I'm not saying the COVID wasn't serious, but it should have been targeted toward the, and this is my personal opinion. I'm not saying anybody else should agree. You do whatever you want. Like, you do you, is what you say, Mark. And older people, absolutely. I would say, don't take a chance. Go ahead and do that, because this is deadly. And, but as far as rushing medication, when I was, in my 30s, 40s, there were beer commercials. There were other movie commercials. Everything on TV is a pharmaceutical commercial. I just don't get it. It's so frustrating. Why are they trying to pump us full of drugs? This isn't even about the shot. This is about all drugs.
Yeah.
You have schizophrenia. Tell your doctor. Are you serious?
Well,
yeah. Well, and hey, I just got to do a quick little funny side story to what you just said. Yeah, great. That's all the commercials. No, I don't watch regular TV, but Cindy, my employee, does, and she constantly bitches about how many times during the day. So she's sewing, she's got stuff, and and she's got like her programs on, and that kind of is also like an external clock that Gunsmoke's on, and I should be at this stage for the day. But all she talks about is how fucking sick she is of watching commercials for the VA. Why? So to your point, Paul, why does the VA have commercials? Is it some way to try to get you to join the military so you can get VA benefits? I mean, how about using all those millions of dollars in advertising to actually take care of those of us who served, who need the help now, right?
Well,
because see, now you want to.
If it was in Canada, they wouldn't do the VA thing in Canada. They'd just be like, hey, come over here. We'll just kill you instead.
Yeah. Have you thought about suicide? Hey, okay, well, here's the deal, guys. Let's call an audible here. We're at an hour and 20 minutes. I don't think I want to go down the next rabbit hole with what I want to say about unconventional warfare, asymmetric warfare, because I think that's going to take us into it, easily another hour-long conversation. Yep. I'll just suffice it to say, and maybe we'll do this again. This is a continuing and evolving podcast, I think, on this subject, because it ain't going away, unfortunately. So maybe we'll save that for the next one. And maybe I will just say this. So for everybody watching, the three of us will talk in our after action review. And we'll come up with an idea of maybe doing a live stream and teaching this class the first 72 hours, because it's really focused on, again, probability and consequences of certain types of events. And really it's problem solving here. Yep. Should you have this skill set or that skill set? Should you be doing this? Should you be doing that? And I know there's a whole bunch of people who are you have your own ideas and your own opinions, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to try to present a cogent argument, and I'm just going to throw some things out there, and that's what the class was designed, and to get you to think, maybe you're not very good at this. Okay, well then should you be spending your limited time and limited resources on this thing you're not very good at? No, you should maybe be focused on other areas, and maybe that's where you have friends like Paul and Jeremy who are good at that other thing. So everybody complements each other and brings other resources and skill sets to the table. And we'll talk offline, but Paul, I want to give you the last kind of comment on that, because you and I have talked about this. Where I'm kind of going, and I want to give everybody the opportunity to hear your perspective from your unique background because you kind of see where I'm going with this.
You talking about unconventional warfare? Or you just
I'm talking about, like specifically the skills and the things that you should be focusing on,
Exactly. Yeah. So one thing that I believe in, and I'm friends with my neighbors. The neighbors are the closest people. You do the best you can. I've had neighbors in the past that are absolute nightmares, and I would not be friends with them. So you don't just blindly accept them, but try and align with people that have different skill sets. For example, I have someone who's a mechanic. He can fix my car if necessary. If I have someone else that has this skill set, we want to unite that way. Now, me with computers or technology, that may help you short term, but overall, I try to build my own skill set. And I do have other skills that I use outside of my day-to-day job. I'm doing things like, having animals, chickens and goats and that kind of stuff, just in case there's some issue. And then, obviously if there's I'm not that far south from the train derailment that caused problems. So that could potentially happen. That would kill my entire plan because I have the eggs, my neighbors, I can trade, I can barter with eggs. And so that's my skill set here. I don't want to drone on about how much I can do with that. But as far as current technology, I can fix their phones. I can fix their computers. I can ensure that they are educated and so on. And it expands beyond the neighborhood. But we need to share that knowledge because my neighbor helped me pick up my chicken coop because he has the equipment. I had to go pick it up at it couldn't be delivered on my road. It's just too back road. And they said, can you take an 18-wheeler into your driveway? I just laughed. So my neighbor fortunately helped me. Again, building those relationships, building the skill set, learning from them, right? He tells me stuff and, he helps me about, how I can attach this trailer to my truck and, get it done right. So educate each other, work with everyone, try and get along, forget the whole media and the whole crazy social media is a cesspool. So stay off. I closed out most of my accounts. I'm going to have to open them up again based on, training and stuff. But, it's just disgusting to me. I can't believe it. And it's killing the kids. It really is. It's hurting the children. So I'll end it with that.
Well, but I'm going to bring it back over to you because I think, kind of pushing the one thing I was hoping that you'd bring up, and we talked about it. And again, and if we do this class as an online, live stream and then, broadcast it afterwards, but, there's nothing wrong because everybody's going to have their own perspective. Some people are going to say it's all about guns and ammo. Other people are going to say, whatever. And we'll flesh that out when we do the class. But I think, Paul, from your perspective, it's all fine and dandy technology. All of this that we're doing, it works right now. But, again, that's kind of the initial comment. Like, great, you've done this and now you're king of the ash pile, right? Because everything else is destroyed and broken. How does any of this really matter at that point? We were kind of laughing about it earlier, right? So I'm not saying don't do this. I mean, if you have the ability and the resources and the capability, yeah, of course, Faraday. But Paul, I mean, where I'm going with this is when we were talking about this the other day, do we even know that any of that will work? I mean, again, not saying it doesn't work, but do we really know that, right? Is that really tested science? Again, it's not, is it even verifiable? Right. And more importantly, when that does happen and okay, you've done this and you've managed to maintain a phone or a computer, and I will make arguments why you should still consider this, but at the end of the day, there is no internet at this point. Depending on the scenario and the probability and the consequences. But Paul, do you want to reflect on that or add a little bit to that? I think that because that's going to be a good segue because I do think we should do this.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. So one of the things that we've talked about is, as far as an EMP goes and Faraday bags, I'm not saying that they won't protect your devices or that you shouldn't do that. But what is the better value of a Faraday bag? It's more of privacy than it is of protection from an EMP, right? Now, at the same time, you need to make sure that those, and we can get into this in the training stuff. You need to make sure that the Faraday bags are sufficient, right? But I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. And
you were basically saying, you got to make sure that the bags are efficient and they are. We can go into a little further detail on the training side of it, but it's still, I think the point I was making, it begs the question of if you've got the money, the resources, the ability, yeah, go ahead and do it. But if you don't, is that really where you're going to, is that the basket you're going to put your eggs into? Yeah. Because what is the trade-off or the benefit of doing it? If you just do a cost benefit analysis, you've spent all this money, you've put all you've put your thoughts and your hopes into that. This will keep this alive. Again, your point was we don't really quite know that. And even if it does maintain that device under an EMP or a nuclear or worst case type of scenario, you might be the only, there is no cell network at that point. So what's the point? Whereas if you do this now, it's really more about the privacy issue. I think that's the more important reason to do it now from a privacy perspective. That's what you were kind of reflecting on. And you kind of went lights out there for a second.
Yeah, I have it timed for this time. Yeah, I did remember what I wanted to say. And the last real, and obviously I'm a civilian, right? So I'm sure there's other tests. The last real known test was in the 60s on an EMP. Well, what has the technology done since the 60s? I mean, it's totally different. So we don't know, at least from my perspective, as to how much an EMP could impact us. Now, with that spy balloon going over sites that they could absolutely take out EMP. Again, I'm more positive on that sense. I don't think they're going to try and completely take us out, but I do believe that they may target certain areas to just kind of cripple us a little bit. So, it's more of it goes back to what you were talking about before. I don't believe we don't even know if an EMP, and honestly, if we see a nuke in the air, we're going to know. Okay. And it will do its job. How much of our country can it take out at once? If we see multiple ones, are we not going to respond before they go off? Some people say, well, the Russians have this technology that could do that. And maybe that's true. But I just think that, again, the likelihood of that, because it is mutual assured destruction. And I'm a little bit positive on that situation. I don't believe they're going to do that because it would destroy themselves. This is how Reagan got us out of the Cold War. And I believe honestly, I think that an EMP, an attack on the grid would kill more people than nukes would, in a sense that it would take less effort, but it would kill anybody that is relying on insulin. It would kill all power. It would kill most of our population across the board. If they knock out all power grids, everybody's done. You don't have to drop a bomb and make us turn to whatever glass.
So I love that because see, to me, that increases in probability because for the reasons you're stating, and I think we should shelve that because that could be a whole nother hour and a half, or we use that as maybe the premise for, teaching the course, because it's all about attribution. If there's attribution and I know you just launched this missile against me, well, okay, then it's going to be reciprocity and it might be mutually assured destruction, or it might be limited, engagement, limited conflict. But if it's, in a container ship, sitting off one of our ports, or if it's already found its way across our porous borders, or, it's flying over, in a balloon that has no attribution, it's going to be much harder to lash out. Now, there's a human element there, and depending who's in power, you might get some crazy, idiots who just like, oh, this had to be North Korea or it had to be Iran, so I'm just going to glass those countries. Well, and then that could escalate, and snowball into another form of conflict. But I think so. Jeremy, kind of turning over to you for your closing thoughts before you do your outro, and you got some housekeeping too. But I'm now more on board with we really should just do this, do the class one night. We can talk. Let's the three of us talk about this in our after action review. But I like it because there's so many things to discuss, and when we're already hitting on one of them, which is, hey, is this possible? Is it probable? What are the likelihoods, and then what are the consequences of that? Because I'm grooving on everything Paul just said, because I think it's that type of event that's going to just kill a shit ton of people. And if it's done properly, like right before fall harvest, no one, think about how many people are not going to survive the fall and the winter. Just you don't have to get nature to do your killing for you. It's going to be, it would be huge. Yeah. All right. I've rambled enough, Jeremy. I'm done. You got response to this, and then you've got some housekeeping and an outro.
So there's a couple things I want to hit on, Paul, and you brought up a really good point about pharmaceuticals. Now, I don't know, Paul or Mark, if you had a chance to see part of RFK's town hall that he did in New Hampshire, but he did talk about guns and gun control and stuff like that. But the important thing is he talked about pharmaceuticals, and I think he said something that was really interesting. He makes it a point to say that he's like, look, like the guns are not an issue. There's clearly something else that is a larger issue, and basically where he took that was pharmaceuticals. He's like, how are we not evaluating pharmaceuticals in the uptick of violent crime, much less like gun crime? And he's like, he's like, look at some of this stuff. He's like, you look on the labels of some of this stuff and it says homicidal tendencies, suicidal tendencies, creating like all of these things. And to be fair, like who can argue with the man? Like, it's true. Like, you look at how chemically doped up so many people are nowadays. And he's like, dude, like, how are we not evaluating the pharmaceutical industry? He's like, you can't tell me that there's no link between the uptick in violence and in the pharmaceuticals. The drugs literally say it on their labels that you can experience these particular tendencies. And for some people, it happens to come through a lot more than others. And, and so I think, to your point, Paul, when it came up to like the pharmaceutical things, and Mark, I believe you hit on this a little bit too, but there is a clear link to this stuff, right? Like, if you ever want to talk about subverting a person's emotional identity or characteristics, put them on some doped up drugs and send them out into the world and see what happens. Like, I will say, like, to me, that really resonated with me. I'm a product of the 90s, and I'm going to fold this into a personal experience. When I was growing up, for whatever reason, the 90s kids were very, very targeted with pharmaceuticals. We had Adderall, we had stuff for ADHD, ADD, Lexapro, Celexa. Like, there's a lot of stuff that people probably will be like, holy shit, like, I was on that. I was on at one point, and I don't even know how I came out like remotely normal, not to make that sound bad, but I was on quite a few things growing up, and I had no idea what they were doing. My parents didn't know any better. And eventually one day I was just like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And my parents were like, okay, that's fine. And basically where that took me was, I literally, when I started those things versus when I got off of those things, I went from a super happy person, super athletic, to a shut-in person. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to go to people's houses. I was depressed. I had, I had spikes in anger. I had a lot of these different things. And then after I got off of it, I hit like a normality again, to where it's like, oh, like, I feel perfectly normal. I can talk to people. I can have normal relations. I want to go out and play outside. I want to go and do these things. I want to go in and I was enjoying life again. And I knew several people within the several schools that I went to. I would say the suicide rate of my graduating class from the two schools that I went to, there was at least 4 people that were on many of the same things that almost every kid from the 90s was on at some point or another. And it's like, that's only the handful that I knew. And so not only do I feel like in the 90s, they heavily experimented with some of this stuff, when they found that something had traction, and they're like, ooh, not only can we make money of this, but think of the political agenda implications, to where it's like, we can sway the characteristics and the actions of people via a mental or emotional state by pumping them full of chemicals to create to create this realm in which, yes, violence is actually going up, but it's synthetically created, right? Like, you tell me another time before a high level of chemical induced changes occurred, that we had the rate of violence that we have from the 90s into the early 2000s to today. There's more people on pharmaceutical drugs for shit that they don't even have, that they may have wrong with them. But I would argue that there's a lot of people that are on drugs that had nothing wrong with them, but were convinced that there was something wrong with them. These people are what makes individuals very trepidatious of the health profession, much less doctors. And so, yeah, I think you brought up a fantastic point, Paul. And I don't know if you guys have something quick to hit on that, but I do have one more point after.
I would say that I could talk to you for hours on that subject.
Yeah.
So we'll shelve that for now.
Yeah, 100%.
You're 100% on board. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s with children in the 90s and 2000s. So I've been through it.
Yeah, and it's startling.
Well, I hate to say it, fellas, but yeah, that needs to be put on hold because that I'm kind of laughing right now because again, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
That's an easy again, and I feel like we rush these things, just to try to keep them in a certain window. But my God, that's like a 3-hour just conversation, just that right there. What has the pharmaceutical industry done to our fucking culture? Period. Yeah. There's the title. Have some pizza and some popcorn and strap in for 3 hours, get a 6-pack of beer ready.
We're going for Godfather length of time here. mine is Marlon Brando. It's not going to be star-studded, I promise.
Okay. All right. So here we're at an hour 40. But it's a great point. And to that point, again, and I know this is going to sound conspiratorial, but again, I'm not even that sophisticated of a man. If you were a sophisticated person with the resources and the capabilities, and like the infrastructure of a state, level, apparatus behind you, I sure as hell would have explored this as one of my multiple, themed or my multiple faceted, my multi-pronged approach to destroying you without having to resort to nuclear weapons. And I'm very serious about this. And again, to Jeremy, and I know you'll agree with me this, Paul, I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but our current adversaries, if we consider Russia and China as the most likely or the most, the highest threat, dude, they see time in a much longer horizon than we do. We're Americans. It's right in front of our face. We'll cut off our nose to spite our face. It's got to be Amazon Prime here 2 days, immediate. We don't see the long game. If I would, well, look again, go to Yuri Bezmenov, KGB, defector, again, there's always some degree of, you got to take it with a grain of salt because it's a defector, but you trust, but verify. But if you take some of his words, just even on face value, they've been doing this since the 60s and 70s. Yeah. Well, okay, here we are. It's 2023. Some of these, if your enemy is willing to play this type of game, now look, it's coming to fruition to every point you're just making, Jeremy. I've corrupted a whole generation or 2 generations. Yeah. Right. Now the condition, I've set the conditions for the battlefield, the battle I want to fight. And if you're into military history and that, you don't fight the enemy's fight, you fight your fight. And if that takes 20, 30 or 50, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and to that.
Anyway, that is a separate one. I don't know. I know you got one more thing that you want to kind of get at. We got to get Paul. Paul's got to have a final closing comment here as well. So why don't we let Paul make a closing comment, and then Jeremy, you just take us out. And you got some housekeeping to do still too.
Yep.
So honestly, so my closing comment is that I've had a great time here. I think there's a lot more that I could talk about. I do not want to bring up anything else to extend things, but trust me, we have a lot to talk about. And, it's been a great time. Redbeard, Mark, thank you very much for inviting me, and we'll talk soon.
Well, so just to let you know, even though when we stop recording, we'll stay on, talk a little bit, and then just like we did in the pregame, we'll do a conference call and do our after action review. So don't go away. And if you're okay, if you got a couple more minutes when we're done, we'll analyze what we did here and figure out how we could do it better next time. Sound good with you, Paul?
Sounds good.
Okay, Jeremy. So then it's the con is yours, sir.
All right.
Final comments, housekeeping, and then outro.
Yeah. So one thing that I actually want to point out is if one final note on the infrastructure issue. You can tell a lot about the state of our infrastructure when you have something like a storm that basically cripples our infrastructure, where there are other places that have actually put thought in consideration, it's probably really good if we try and add a buffer to this, just from I don't know, a windstorm or a hurricane or but at the same time, there's also areas in the United States that the grid just fails. It just fails because it's so freaking old. And it's okay, that's less than optimal. And I hate to bring it up, but you have a lot of people that are that want to go entirely green. Well, we saw the effects of what happened in Texas when they got cold, and unfortunately, people died during that. This is one of those things to where like you either don't put a ton of thought into it and you're just like, like it'll buff out, or you overthink it, you get too far ahead of yourself, and then you overcompensate for something that may not have been the appropriate problem to try and solve. The other thing too is look at how many people have shot out transformers in substations. Like they've just gone and shot at them, and that affects so many people in so many places. And it's like, like it says a lot when you can have a dude that goes out there with like a 22 or something a little bit bigger, and they take a couple, they take some shots at this stuff, and it just downs every single thing. To me, I find that extremely problematic. So that's something that we'll talk about a little bit more too as time goes on. But yeah, I'm kind of like wrapping this up. I really do feel that this has been a pretty good podcast. I think we hit on a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to expound upon, a lot of stuff to take into consideration, and I look forward to some of the future episodes and all of that. So I'm gonna kind of
we'll definitely just real quickly. So we lost Paul. We'll get him on the phone with the AAR portion, but you're absolutely right. And we're only just, again, we had our thoughts. Oh, no, Paul's back. We had our thoughts. And
Sorry.
No, it's all good. We're only at the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, we're going to have to follow up that, without a doubt, because again, we didn't even get to the areas that, there's just so much to talk about, and it's all so important. It just is. So
yeah, 100%. So I do have a little bit of housekeeping. So the question that I posed, the previous episode, it was basically of the 5 fundamental documents that basically assisted us in creating the Constitution. Which one which of those documents being the first one is it? So I did have we had a couple of responses. The one guy that had the most, I think, thought out, and he was close. He was close enough for us to I think to give him this one. But I will provide the answer as well. Also, check that out. You are the fabulous winner of this, and the winner of this awesome prize is Johnson
T5 Custom Kydex.
Yep.
Oh, I spoke over you. Sorry, I was just giving a plug. T5 Custom Kydex holster. Yep, with a sidecar. Yep. Okay.
So the person who got the closest and had a really good explanation is Johnson Christopher 1. You really did a good job. I will actually flesh this out here a little bit more, but hey, congratulations, sir. You did a good job. The answer that is the actual correct answer to kind of bring this out. Like I said, he was super close, and I'm just keying this up. But the first document was the Charter of the 1100 Charter of Liberties, and the 2 topics that were involved in this, or the 2 areas that were involved in this, were the right to property and right to representation back in 1100. So I could have gave it away a little bit more. I could have said think closer to the downfall of the Vikings, which a lot of people love Vikings, but the 1100 Charter of Liberties was the first fundamental document preceding or coming before the Magna Carta, the 1215 Magna Carta. So Johnson Christopher 1, great job. You were super close, and you were close enough, and I think you had the best explained answer on that. You really fleshed it out well. So congratulations, sir. You are going to walk away with a awesome holster. So cheers to you. And the reason I raise these questions is because it's an opportunity for us all to learn. So
I'm not gonna lie. I've had, just real quickly, I had like 3 different conversations with people because I wasn't 100% sure of the answer, and I
Yeah.
had my own thoughts. And I know Paul and I even talked
Mhm.
about it as well. Not to
Yeah.
throw Paul under the bus, but we had our own thoughts, and
Yeah.
and it's fun, and that's the whole point. It is
Yeah.
to get everybody to think and do some research. And I'm not gonna lie, I didn't research it. I just thought about it, and then I conversed with other people about it. I'm like, oh, well, what
Yeah.
about this, and what about that, and
Yep.
and it was cool to see the comments that people left,
Yeah.
because that was part of my education as well. So really, I like this. I hope other people like it, and
Yeah.
and here's to you, sir. I mean, hey, free
Yeah.
piece of gear,
Here.
right? And it's a good piece of gear, American made company, right? Second Amendment, support your First Amendment, and thanks for educating us with your answers and your comments.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it was really well done, because he was like, it was funny because he was like, he was so close. It's almost like he wanted to say pre-Magna Carta, and it was like, I was like, like he's right there. He actually fleshed it out and explained his position really well. So I was like, all right, I yield. So, but yeah. So for those of you again that are wondering about it, it's the 1100 Charter of Liberties, and in this charter, it discusses the right to property and the right to representation. That's where they are the first of many to come of our rights and liberties that were expressed as concerns. Like, hey, look, like we have a right to our land. We have the right to cultivate our property and to live as free people with our property. And we also want to have proper representation, because you're all kind of a bunch of assholes. So, so, it's trivial, peasantry problems, but that's where a lot of it started. So, yeah. So that's basically all I have for our trivia. So.
Well, just real quick, then last little piece of housekeeping. So Jeremy is going to reach out to you in the comment section from that video, and he's going to ask you to send us an email to our email address, and Jeremy will do all that coordinating instructions. And then we obviously just need to know where we're shipping this thing, so we're going to need to be able to reach out to you, get some feedback, and then find out your shipping address, and then I'll drop this bad boy in the mail.
Heck yeah. All right. And Paul, as we've said before already, thank you very much for stopping on. It's been a pleasure, and I feel like you really do bring a lot from your profession and from your point of view, because it does factor into a lot of different things, and and there's a lot of really good insight that you've provided, especially as it pertains to perhaps our weaknesses infrastructurally. Both through your background and in other areas, because other areas do affect your background too. With that being said, though, thank you everybody for stopping by and watching the episode. Thank you for dealing with faces that are better on radio than in front of your screen, but it is what it is. And on that note,
right on.
Look,
well, hey, before you take us out, so again, for everybody watching, the 3 of us will do our, when we talk over the phone here in a couple seconds, do our AAR. I really think we need to go forward with setting a date and doing the class and really kicking that off as a live stream. So stay tuned, and we'll probably figure out, because maybe I'll do a short video saying, hey, tomorrow at this time, we're going to do a live stream. Join us if you can. Well, we'll figure out how to get that word out there and announce it. But I think in the very near future, the 3 of us, and maybe if we can get this other person on board as well, we'll do that as a live stream. We'll teach the class. Heck, if some people are interested, leave a comment below, and I can bring on a whole bunch of people. I think we would probably want to keep it to like no more than 10 people. In this forum, you can be in the live stream. You could chat in. I've done that before as a test. Like, you could be on the live stream, chat in with a good question, and I might just message you separately and be like, hey, if you want to be on, come on, and then we'll bring you over and you can ask your question. So we'll figure this out, but I think we need to do this sooner than later. We already said that last time, Jeremy. So I think sometime next week, and I know next week is the 4th of July. All the more reason we should do it is because next week is the 4th of July. So so stay tuned on that, everybody.
So I do also want to ask a question, because I'm really curious, given the conversation we had this evening. To those of you that watch this, who do you feel that our greatest enemy is? Now, to each person, this may be different, to me. And Mark, Paul, for all intents and purposes, I have no intention of deleting myself or doing anything rash. I have a lot to live for. And so with that being said, you know, outside of my aspirations and wanting to exist, I firmly believe that, you know, our government is the greatest enemy we face as a people because they are the closest to us. They have the potential to do a lot of things that would be caught under the guise of doing the right thing or doing what is
Well,
necessary.
hey, I thought you were going to do an outro as opposed to
Yep.
start another podcast.
So I'm curious on that point to know what you all think, and that is a conversation for another episode. So leave your comments
Well,
below.
leave a comment.
Yes.
Leave a comment. Yeah, but Jeremy, you're sucking us into a podcast part 2.
I know.
for this
So
one.
on that note, everybody, before we get too crazy, just remember the flame of liberty shall not and will not be extinguished so long as good people are willing to defend and protect it and support it. So on that note, Mark, I think that's it. I think we did it. So
Hey, as always, thanks to everybody for watching. Many
thank
thanks
you.
to Paul for taking the time out of his
Yes,
busy schedule
thank
to
you,
join
Paul.
us. We will see him again. And I don't think we'll see any of you guys until later next week. And next week is the 4th of July. So for
Yep.
all of our brothers and sisters across this great country,
Yep.
happy Independence Day.
Yes.
Enjoy it with friends and family, but do not forget that what that
Yep.
day
Yep.
signifies and what this
Yep.
this wonderful experiment, you know, is and how we can get back on the
Mhm.
right path. And then just one last plug. One of the ways we can do it, even during times of trouble, is by acts of kindness. So please
Yes.
see our Centerline Systems charity auction.
Yes.
That video will go next week on Monday, July
Yeah.
3rd at 1400. And I hope you can be a part of it. And please share it with everybody. And just let's try to be real people, right?
Yeah.
So
Peaceful, not harmless.
that's right.
All right. On that note, everybody, again, thank you very much. And we're out of here. Take care.
All right. We'll see everybody next time. All right. Woo woo. Thanks, everybody.